Hi guys, it has now been 3 months since I started teaching myself game dev, and in that time I've worked with a framework called Monogame. I've moved on to the Unity engine. I've built 4 games, 2 with Monogame, 2 with Unity, and the last of those games was an entry into a game jam, and I'll be discussing the results of that in this video. So what I'm going to be talking about is what I've been doing over the last 3 months. I'll talk a little bit about my 4 games, about the decision I made in terms of Monogame Unity, how I feel about the first 3 months, how that's gone, and then what's coming up in the next 3 months. So the main thing I want to say about these first 3 months is that I've just had so much fun with all of this. I wish I had started earlier. I mean, I said that in my first video where I talked about, I wish I'd done it 10, 20, even 30 years ago. And I really do wish I had started earlier, but we can't go back and change the past. Better late than never, as they say. So I'm glad I'm doing it now. But yeah, I really have enjoyed this. I'm going to carry on doing it. I'm in this for the long haul. And yeah, I'm just really, really enjoying it. These are the 4 games that I created. So the first 2 were done in Monogame. So that is Pong and Orberella. I've already shown the GitHub there. I had the 2 versions of Pong. Orberella, I really enjoyed making that one. That was kind of like a fairly, not original, but that was just a game which I kind of made up. It wasn't like a clone of another older type of game, which all of the others were. So then the second 2, this was when I moved over to Unity. So Toasty Tumble is basically a Flappy Bird type game, except you're bouncing toast around a little kitchen. And then Asterworlds, that's the most recent game. That is basically an asteroids game. There's a slight twist to it with planets, but that was to try and get it to fit in with the GameDev TV theme. Didn't fit the theme particularly well, as you'll see from the scoring when I talk about the game jam. But overall, I feel like they've kind of advanced in a fairly linear way. Though saying that, I did, of all of the games, I wasn't so keen on Toasty Tumble. I preferred Orberella. I think Asterworlds is definitely my best game so far, but partly the reason for that was because of how much functionality you get from Unity itself, and I made heavy use of asset packs there. A lot of the feedback that I got saying, oh, I really like the visual effects and the screen shake and stuff like that, all that came from an asset. It wasn't anything that I did myself. Those were the kinds of things that I just couldn't do with Monogame. And so I'm definitely glad now that I have moved over to Unity. I wanted to talk a bit about my choice to start with Monogame. I think it was the best decision for me because at the start I was so intimidated by the look of the visual engines, namely Unity and Godot, that I thought it's just going to be too much for me to try and learn how to use one of those engines, as well as trying to learn the whole concept of game development as well. And for me, I think one of the reasons why I struggled is because I have a programming background which is nothing to do with games. So I've spent the last 10, 12 years doing web development, and before that I did application development. I've never done any game development. I did a little bit at university, and I talked about that in that early video, but that was 20 years ago. I can't remember any of that now. But I wouldn't recommend it for anybody else. So if you are new to game dev, if you're younger, if you haven't done much in the way of programming before, I would definitely say just pick one of the visual engines and go with that. Do not use Monogame. I think Monogame is only useful for basically old school people that really do want to work purely with code and just don't want a visual engine. Now, I then made the decision to move over to Unity after a few months. I'm not going to talk about my choice of engine because I did a whole video on that, so you can see why I chose Unity. But that decision to move over to it after a few weeks, that was definitely one of the best things that I've done. It's been so much easier to use than Monogame. And honestly, I picked up the basics quite quickly. So I've done 2 games in Unity. I've really enjoyed making those, and I'm really enjoying using Unity. There's tons of information out there. Though saying that, one thing that I have noticed, a couple of problems in terms of like the tutorials, is one is that a lot of the content that's out there is quite out of date. So Unity has obviously changed, it's always being updated, and a lot of the videos and courses and things are for Unity versions several years ago, and they're using maybe like the old input system and other things which are now obsolete, so that's a little bit annoying. And another thing that I found is quite a lot of the code that I see, it's not really using the best in terms of good programming practices. Now this is something that me, because I've got a programming background, obviously I can sort of spot certain things which are generally seen as bad practices, and it's fine when you're creating a tiny little game like a game of Pong or Flappy Bird or something like that. It's not going to matter for that. You know, for someone who wants to then go on to build bigger games that are more complex, you do need to have better coding techniques, and I haven't found much in the way of tutorials that really talk about that kind of side of things. It's very much, this is how we're going to get it done. And I think maybe one of the reasons for that could be this whole kind of game jam mentality. So that's a good point, little segue there into the game jam. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about my experience with it and what I thought about it. So I will go through the results in a little bit, but in terms of how I personally found it, so it was a 10-day game jam, which is a very generous timescale. Most of them are around 48 hours, 3 days maybe. And what I found was that I just completely immersed myself in it for those 10 days. The downside of that was that it meant that I pretty much neglected everything else. I didn't do any exercise. I didn't do any kind of like chores around the house. I didn't eat particularly well. And yeah, everything just got neglected. I didn't socialize at all. I just literally was just working on this game. And that kind of level of focus for me, it wasn't really a good thing, because I didn't like that feeling of being so kind of drawn in and so pressured. And then towards the end of the jam, the last couple of days, where I've just been talking about how good programming practices are good, I ended up doing quick hacky things at the end just to get it done. And I hated that I did that, but I was like, I've got 5 hours left, I have to just get it done, I haven't got time to make the code pretty. And so that was something that I found stressful. And I know there's quite a lot of people out there that really do enjoy game jams, but I think if you do a lot of jams and you're used to simply coding that way, hobbling something together as fast as you possibly can, you're never going to learn those, you know, the better techniques for really, you know, scoping out a bigger project and doing code, you know, that can be scaled and maintained over time. And so maybe that's one of the reasons why the code that's in a lot of tutorials isn't necessarily the best, because game jams is just such a huge part of the game dev culture. I don't know, this is just kind of speculation on my part. One thing that I enjoyed was the social participation. So I was in the Discord most of the time, chatting to people in there. I was actually quite surprised at how quiet it was. There were 3,500 participants, and they together have made just over 1,000 entries, but that's a lot of people, and I was expecting the Discord, social media, all of that stuff to be absolutely blowing up, and it really wasn't. It's actually much quieter than I thought, and I don't know if perhaps that's because it was more of a beginner game jam. I don't really know. I mean, as I said, in my first jam, didn't know really what to expect, but I did enjoy that part, and I think I would do another jam in the future. I don't think I would do them very often, because I said I didn't really like that time pressure. But if I did do them in the future, I think I would do a shorter one, not necessarily 48 hours, but maybe something around 3 or 4 days. Something like that would probably suit me. And it might provide a nice break from maybe a longer term project that I was working on. Right, so the GameDev TV Game Jam. So I've never entered the game jam before. I didn't really know much about them, to be honest. I didn't really know what to expect, but I knew this was going to be a big one simply because it had a free course which was given to everybody. That's one of the reasons I joined it, to be fair. So over 1,000 entries. These are the first few. Funnily enough, I didn't actually play any of the top 5, but I'll probably go back and give them another go, actually. Now the game which came number 6, this is Cell Damage. This for me was definitely my favorite game out of all the games that I tried. This was the only game that I actually rated 5 stars in every single category. I really enjoyed this one. For most of the games that I was testing, I tried to just play them for about 5 or 10 minutes. I ended up doing something like 60, 70 games. Let me see if it tells me anywhere what I actually did. Yeah, this is where I can see. So I actually rated 68 games. But Cell Damage, I found it completely hooked me. I was only intending to play it for around 10 minutes, and I've ended up putting about 2 hours into it. It was just so addictive. So I'm really glad that it did well. So if you get a chance to check it out, I do highly recommend it. Good game, that one. So my game, how did it do? I was actually quite pleased. So overall, it's come 80th, which sounds quite terrible. When I first saw that, I was like, 80th, wow, that's not very good. And then I kind of remembered, oh, there's over 1,000 entries, so that's actually like the top 8% or something. So I was actually really pleased by that. And something that just wasn't expecting was just how much feedback I have. I'll show some of the comments in a moment. But what's it really interesting here was that the number one category for me was actually sound. It came 19th in sound. And for me, sound is one of those things that I tend to do more as an afterthought. But I have a pretty good idea of why it did so well on the sound category. So 76 rankings. So these are the comments that I had. And basically, I was really blown away by the very positive comments that I got. There was a few comments which said, oh, you should put in this, you should put in that. There was a bug here, there was a bug there, whatever. But yeah, there was a lot of really positive comments, which I wasn't really expecting. You know, I thought it was just going to get lost in the noise, really, with like 80 games. But there was quite a few people that were surprised by the AI voiceover. And that is the thing that I think made the score on the sound go up. So if you watched any of the devlogs on the game, I'd put in just this basically an AI voice, which was generated by this website called 11 Labs, but it just adds quite a lot to the game, I think. And a lot of people were like, oh, wow, how did you do the AI voice? And I said, it's actually really easy. Overall, I was really pleased by this. I was so surprised by all of these comments, because most of them came in within the first couple of days. There was like about 50 of them came in within the first couple of days. It was really crazy, and I was just struggling to kind of keep up with them all, because I was trying to play all of the other games that other people had. So the people that had commented on my game, I was going over to their game and playing it, which I stopped doing in the end because I found that it was just too much. Yes, Cell Damage. This is the guy that did Cell Damage. I really like that game. At first I was like, should I keep on working with it? And at this point I'm still kind of trying to decide what I'm going to do next, but I'll talk about that separately. So yeah, really, really great comments, great community. This was something that I definitely enjoyed about the Game Jam. I now want to start thinking about what I'm going to be doing next. Over the last few days, since all of the Game Jam stuff has settled down, I've actually just been playing games, really. I've taken a little bit of time off of the actual game dev. As I said, I did feel a little bit burned out. But I've really been thinking about what is it that I want to do next. So when I first started to get all of that feedback from Astroworlds, I started to immediately think about, okay, I could add this, I could add that, and I had all these ideas for things that I could do with it. There were a lot of common themes that were coming up in those comments. People were talking about being able to upgrade the ship, or the guns in particular, having some kind of auto fire, making the planets, you know, do something more interesting than you just kind of like fly over to them. So there was a lot of ideas there, and they're all extremely valid. But I have to wonder, do I want to keep working on Astroworlds? It's just a game of asteroids. It's just another little actiony arcade game. Now, if you've watched any of my previous devlogs, you'll know that when it comes to me playing my own games, I really suck at them. I'm no good at those little arcade games. The reason why I picked those 4 tiny little games, so I've done a Pong, I've done a Flappy Bird, and now I've done an Asteroids. I was also planning to do lots more of those tiny little games, things like Frogger, Space Invaders, Tetris, maybe a game of Snake. You know, there's lots of those little tiny games. And honestly, I thought I was going to be doing those kinds of games for a long time, probably many, many months. But honestly, I feel like at this point, I don't think I would learn very much from doing more of those small games. And if I was to work more on Astroworlds, yes, adding more stuff to it and making it a bigger, more complex game, I would certainly learn a lot. But the problem is, it's just not really the kind of game that I actually want to work on. So these arcade games is just not me. My my passion really is for the kinds of games that are more games that you think about: strategy games, management, simulation, resource building, base building, crafting, gathering, survival, those kinds of things. I mean, don't get me wrong, I do love to kind of like blow shit up in GTA and, you know, hack stuff apart in Skyrim. You know, I love a good narrative driven RPG is as well. You know, my three favorite series are probably Fallout, Skyrim, and Mass Effect, but I would never try and make a game like that. But the kind of games I would like to make are definitely along the kind of like strategy simulation type genres. And this is another thing that I've been thinking about, like, what do I want to do next? And so I've kind of got an idea. I've got an idea of about three different games that I want to make, and they're all kind of something small which is bigger than an Asteroids or a Flappy Bird, but not huge, but something that could stand alone on its own. So I'm probably going to do another video about this. Actually, I'm going to talk about how you can take a larger game such as Stardew Valley and break it down into smaller components and make a sort of a self-contained game around that. And that's what I've been thinking about. And so at this point, I'm still not 100% decided on what I'm going to do. And to be quite honest, I feel like I need to do some more learning at this point. More tutorials, watching the courses. I've now got a new course to go through from the Game Jam that I won. I've still got a load of books I want to read. So I'm going to spend the next, I don't know, week or two just learning more stuff, thinking through my ideas a little bit more, and then coming up with some kind of decision as to what I want to work on next. But I feel like my next project is going to be bigger. I need to start branching out a little bit. And so I don't want to rush into the first idea that comes into my head, because if I'm going to be working on it for, say, you know, maybe 2 to 3 months rather than 2 to 3 weeks, I want to make sure I'm working on the right thing. I think that's everything I wanted to cover. But yeah, in summary, I've had a great time. I'm really pleased with what I've managed to achieve in my first 3 months, and I just can't wait to see how the rest of this year pans out and what I do in the next 3 months, the next 6 months, and so forth. So thanks very much for watching, guys. Speak to you next time.